increase their contribution, and I think I would like to thank Iceland and Estonia, I think, who have already made that commitment this year, and many others who have already made that commitment, but they can only do it from the next budget cycle because of budgetary reasons. So I think this is one way of being creative and trying to bring additional resources in the Secretariat. That's all.
Thank you. And we still have one question coming from Latvia. Mr. Kols, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Well, I wasn't planning to have my intervention at this part of our agenda, but Mr. Lopatka obviously triggered certain, not only emotions, but practicalities. Obviously, I'm not going to argue. If that is conviction of Mr. Lopatka in Austria, no matter what, to have a dialogue. Colleagues, I have a suggestion. It's a very practical suggestion. Obviously, there may be more in OSCE who seek to have a dialogue under current circumstances with the Russian Federation. We should appoint a special representative from the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly who should conduct these relationships. And I suggest that Mr. Lopatka would be an ideal candidate. And I would expect that he would commute regularly from Vienna to Moscow to facilitate that dialogue and report back to the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, from which then we can assess, is there a room for a dialogue or not. Colleagues, I ask you to support this suggestion, and I think then we can close the discussion, should we have dialogue or not. We will have a special representative, but particularly trying to facilitate that dialogue. Thank you.
I think it's a question more for the President and for the Assembly. I mean, but yeah, we can take that into consideration. Actually, Mr. Lopatka, you were before the special rep on parliamentary dialogue, so basically just restarting your old mandate, but it's up to the President.
Thank you, dear Roberto, for your report and also for all the questions and answers given to them. Now we move on to item number 5, which is consideration of the proposed amendment to the Rules of Procedure. Ahead of this meeting, the International Secretariat received a proposed amendment to the Rules of Procedure with sufficient support according to Rule 46.2. I will first ask the sponsor of this proposed amendment, Mr. Richard Skols, from Latvia, to present his proposal. I will then open the floor to any member wishing to speak. I will also give the floor to the chair of the subcommittee on rules of procedure, Mr. Pascal Alizad, for his opinion. Now I first give the floor to Mr. Richard Skols, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, Mr. Secretary General, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to address a crucial matter that demands our attention, the proposed amendment to the Rule 35 of the OSCE PA Rules of Procedure. The context for this proposal stems from our recent Standing Committee meeting during the Vancouver annual session, where numerous amendments were presented for consideration. Notably, one proposal sought to introduce a suspension mechanism for countries blatantly violating OSCE commitments and international law. The International Secretariat and President Sederfeld argued that the amendment couldn't be deliberated upon because Turkey and, importantly, Belarus, absent from the annual session, had submitted written objections. It was due to these absentee objections submitted by the Belarus delegation that the amendment could not be considered. The Secretariat arguing that Turkey and Belarus make up to 2 objections which automatically rejects the amendment according to the tradition at the OSCE Permanent Council, all -2. It is perplexing that we are relying on the procedures of the OSCE Permanent Council, a body of ambassadors, rather than adhering to parliamentary practices befitting our status as a parliamentary assembly. The tradition of in-person voting in parliaments should guide our decisions, not the bureaucratic working of Permanent Council, whose decision-making has led to a regrettable paralysis within the OSCE. Importantly, our Assembly rules of procedure do not account for written objections, unlike the Permanent Council rules. Drawing an analogy between the two sets of rules is not only inappropriate but also illogical, given the fundamental differences in their decision-making structures. I firmly assert that any provision for objections at the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly Standing Committee must be something that committee has made a decision on. Therefore, I propose an amendment to the Rule 35, which reads, "The principle of consensus -1 takes into account written objections communicated to the President of the Assembly by the head of the national delegation not later than 1 hour before the announced time for the opening of a standing committee meeting." However, dear colleagues, I must simultaneously underline that foundational principle of my proposal is within the vote itself. I myself do not believe that this proposal should necessarily be adopted, and I will vote against it myself. What I believe is important is the setting of precedent with this vote, with which we either specify the rules of procedure for absentee voting or determine that such voting, even with references to tradition of the Permanent Council, is not permissible within our Assembly. It is with the aim to strengthen our commitment to democratic principles and parliamentary practices. Let us not be swayed by procedural hurdles, but focus on creating an environment that upholds the values we collectively stand for in the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. And it has come to my attention that there will be an attempt to move this proposed amendment to the Rules of Procedure Committee for further scrutiny. I have to strongly object to such a move, Madam President, because the rule is very clear and basic, which has been adopted in previous sessions, and none of the sessions, the Rules of Procedure Committee ever objected to such a practice. So therefore, any further discussions are just waste of time, and I call for the Parliamentary Assembly here and today cast their vote either in support or against my proposed amendments for the Rules of Procedure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Coles. Before giving the floor to any comments or questions, I first give the floor to Mr. Montella to clarify the proceedings in Vancouver.
No, I think President Alizar will comment on the details of the amendment, but just Mr. Coles, because you mentioned that in Vancouver on the proposal of President Sederfeld or myself, you mentioned that in Vancouver on the proposal of Madam Sederfeld or myself, we decided to withdraw this. I just wanted to, in defense of President Sederfeld, President Emeritus Sederfeld, the President did not decide not to submit it to the discussion because she already saw that Turkey or some other delegation was going to be against it. It was a request coming from the Ukrainian delegation. The Ukrainian delegation was promoting this amendment. After an assessment that we made, myself, I made this assessment together with Mikita Poturayev, where we thought we want to send a signal from Vancouver where, because we had before of Vancouver, we had in Warsaw a meeting where somehow the mood after the Warsaw Standing Committee meeting was that a proposal was defeated somehow. So we wanted to give a signal, also a political signal, that out of Vancouver, Ukraine comes out with a strong victory, if you like to call it. And there was on the table for Vancouver the election, of course, of Mr. Poturayev for Vice President. There was the resolution that the Ukrainian delegation presented. There was the proposal of the Ukrainian delegation to have an ad hoc committee, which was then adopted, and of course the confirmation of Artur Gerasimov. So there were four things, let's say, take away that Ukraine could say, we have proposed four things, and we came out of Vancouver, like if you want to put it in football terms, with a 4-0 victory. And we thought, together with Mikita, that if this amendment would have been tabled at that time, as we knew already that there would not be consensus, but not from 2 delegations, because in Vancouver it was like 16 delegations, not of course for reasons of any lukewarm support of Ukraine, but for other reasons which has to do more with the existential survival of the organization, would have voted against. So we thought, why to go through a procedure which will fail, and it looks like Ukraine won 4-1 instead of 4-0. So it was more like a political kind of, but it was not a suggestion of Madam President Sederfeld or myself to not put it to the vote. It was upon request of the Ukrainian delegation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Montella. Yes, Mr. Coles, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam President. Obviously, I don't want to abuse the time. I made my arguments, and Mr. Montella, obviously, it is something that I reflect from the Vancouver session, where Mr. Baker in particular, when I raised the question where in the rules of procedure is actually entitled that somebody who is not present can submit objection that is counting as a vote, he stated that it's actually adopted tradition from the Permanent Council. So based on all that, and obviously there was as well the written objection by the Belarus delegation, so therefore it doesn't change the substance. I don't think that the matter is about what exactly happened, but the thing is to actually that we have to agree if that is okay or not okay in the Parliamentary Assembly to cast such a vote. Thank you.
It's all clear. It's just I just wanted to correct the record that it was not President Sederfeld's fault. You know, President Sederfeld did what was asked from the Ukrainian, so she acted correctly there.
Thank you, and I give the floor at this stage to the chair of the Rules Committee, Mr. Alizad, and thereafter the floor is open for comments. Mr. Alizad, please.
Oui, merci Madame la Présidente. Je voudrais au début de cette intervention saluer les interventions précédentes de nos collègues ukrainiens et autrichiens, parce que finalement, ce qu'ils ont exprimé reprend en quelque sorte le souci que nous avons avec cet amendement. Ils ont exprimé des propos de sagesse. Bien évidemment, nous condamnons tous l'agression russe contre l'Ukraine. Là n'est pas le débat, et nous avons, à chaque fois que c'était nécessaire, réaffirmé notre soutien à nos collègues ukrainiens. Ça a été dit, le dialogue est impossible aujourd'hui, mais nous devons, je crois, préserver les capacités de dialogue à terme. Ceci, pour moi, n'est pas un jeu, nous ne sommes pas des joueurs, nous sommes des parlementaires responsables, et je crois que nous devons rester fermes sur nos valeurs, mais nous devons rester aussi ouverts pour le futur parce que serait une OSCE sans la Russie? Pour moi, ça n'existe pas, même si aujourd'hui c'est compliqué et que nous devons, je l'ai dit, rester fermes sur nos valeurs. Et je crains que si nous adoptions aujourd'hui cet amendement, et j'ai noté quand même avec intérêt que l'auteur lui-même de l'amendement vient de nous dire qu'il allait voter contre. J'avoue que j'ai un peu de mal à comprendre, mais bon, après tout, chacun fait bien comme il veut. Mais je pense qu'il y a énormément de pays qui n'ont pas encore pris la connaissance de l'amendement et de ses conséquences. Donc moi, Madame la Présidente, je ne saurais que vous recommander une chose, c'est de renvoyer cette demande devant le Rules Committee, que nous fassions une information exhaustive de l'ensemble des pays et qu'on ramène les conclusions à notre réunion de Vienne. Je crains quand même, je voudrais dire, ça a été rappelé, mais que l'usage aujourd'hui, c'est déjà celui-là, que nous sommes dans une situation où, à certains moments et dans certains pays, quand nous nous réunissons, certains collègues ne peuvent pas être présents, et que si nous supprimons cette option, nous coupons tout dialogue possible. Donc, sous couvert d'un amendement qui paraît anodin et qui finalement reprend par écrit ce que nous pratiquons déjà, porté par un auteur qui va voter lui-même contre, je crains que ce soit un acte grave et je voudrais vraiment, mes chers collègues, et je le dis avec beaucoup de solennité, nous prenions le temps à la fois de l'information exhaustive de tous les pays, toutes les délégations, et que nous mesurions bien les conséquences de sa non-adoption. Parce que vous l'avez compris, l'objectif, c'est qu'il ne soit pas adopté et que la coutume, que l'usage soit cassé. Je trouve ça extrêmement dangereux. Cette dernière phrase, c'est mon opinion personnelle, mais je ferai mon job comme il le faut en tant que président du Subcommittee Rules Committee. Merci.
Merci, Monsieur Alizar, pour votre analyse. Thereafter, I open the floor for any comments or questions. Mrs. Karimi from the Netherlands first.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I have to say that I am really very much puzzled by contribution of our colleague from Latvia. Because when I was preparing with my colleagues from our delegation for this amendment, and how should we actually vote for this amendment, our understanding was that this is going actually introduce in rules of procedures existing practice. That was our reading. And we found it actually very reasonable amendment. However, now listening to my colleague, I am really surprised because it is not introduced in a kind of good faith, if I can say it in this way, because the objective is something else, if I understand that he himself wants to vote against. And this practice, not actually the amendment itself, but this practice, that's not something that we could actually support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the next one is Belarus. Mr. Savinuk, please.
Благодарю вас, госпожа председатель. Прежде всего, хотел бы поддержать аргументы представителя Франции Паскаля Ализара, который представил вполне логичный анализ неприемлемости данной поправки. От себя хочу добавить, что данная поправка демонстрирует какую-то странную логику. С одной стороны, возникают препятствия для участия отдельных делегаций, с другой стороны, мы даже хотим запретить им вносить изменения в письменном виде. На мой взгляд, я полагаю, что эта поправка, она прежде всего не демократична по своей сути. Она, по сути дела, создает дополнительный барьер для высказывания своего мнения. Она сокращает возможность для дискуссии, затрудняет процесс обмена мнениями, создает, по сути дела, хитрые технические барьеры для ограничения многообразия мнений в нашей организации. Я считаю, что бюрократическое мышление не может доминировать в политической организации. И бюрократическую процедуру нельзя ставить выше независимого мнения. Благодарю за внимание.
Thank you. And next one will be Cyprus, Mrs. Charalambides. And I would ask you to be very brief because we only have 1 hour at our disposal and many items still undiscussed.
Madam President, I will really be brief. As a member of the Subcommittee of Rules on Procedure, I fully support Mr. Pascal's Alizar comment. And also I do agree with my colleague Lobatka, Mr. Lobatka, because this is a platform of dialogue. We have to keep corridors open for discussions, for arguments to be raised. We might disagree, but this is what diplomacy is about. To speak up, to insist once again and again and again until we reach an understanding. So if we start changing the character and the spirit of this organization, what will the purpose that it will serve of? This is what we're here for, to discuss, even if there are disputes between us. And I really want to say that I regret the fact that some delegations decided not to be part of this assembly in Armenia, and we have to keep on talking between us and exchanging arguments. Thank you.
Thank you. And next one will be Lithuania. Mr. Surplus, please.
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to react to what our colleague from France has said. I don't think we should be delaying this question because, well, we have a problem with this organization being a hostage of Russia, and that is why I think we have a threat to the reputation of this organization that was meant for securing stability, peace, and democracy in Europe. So, therefore, I just would like to overturn the logic proposed by Belarus and say that yes, we are a political organization. That is why we shouldn't play bureaucratic games. And we still have the consensus -2 regulation that remains unchanged, but let us then be effective in being present and then representing the positions of our countries and not submitting anything in written, which it just paralyzes the organization. So let's not postpone, let's take the decision. That's my argument. Thank you.
Thank you. Next one is Ukraine, Mr. Poturayev.
Dear colleagues, well, you know, using the word dialogue so many times annoys us a little bit because at the same time we receive on our phones news about new killings of Ukrainian cities. Since this morning, new victims among civilians. And let me remind you, colleagues, that Soviet Union collapsed not because good people in OSCE reminded to Soviet diplomats that Soviet Union started war in Afghanistan and tortured its citizens in Gulag. No, Soviet Union collapsed because it was exhausted in Afghanistan and produced more tanks and rockets than bread and butter. That's why Soviet Union collapsed, not because of dialogue. And this organization is not absolutely useless, dealing with only dialogue. This organization established ODIHR, which raised standards of democratic elections all over the world. And let's ask ourselves, probably these efforts of so-called Russian so-called Federation focused on blocking budgets. Maybe it's because they don't want ODIHR to work. Maybe it's because that next time there will be so-called elections of so-called president of so-called Russian Federation. And ODIHR could tell a word about these elections. That's why they don't want OSCE in general and ODIHR to work next year. It's not about dialogue, colleagues. It's about blocking organization. It's about destroying this organization. And let's do at least anything to start apply at least smoothest sanctions against raiders and mobsters. Thank you.
Thank you. And next one is Switzerland, Mr. Aebi.
Sehr geehrte Frau Präsidentin, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, die Mission der OSZE beruht auf dem unerschütterlichen Willen zum Dialog. Dialog, so schwierig und unerträglich dieser auch sein mag. Es ist unsere zentrale Aufgabe, bei der OSZE die Werte der Demokratie durch die Kraft der Debatte bedingungslos zu verteidigen. Es hat mich daher gefreut, dass die Präsidentin bei ihrer Begrüßung erwähnt hat, dass zwischen Armenien und Aserbaidschan ein Dialog möglich erscheint. Mit Russland ist ein solcher Dialog derzeit unmöglich. Wenn wir jedoch die Werte der Demokratie über jene der Gewalt stellen wollen, ich hoffe, dass wir alle dies nicht wollen, dass wir dies wollen, dann müssen wir uns die Möglichkeit der Debatte bewahren. Stimmen wir dem vorliegenden Vorschlag zu, entfernen wir uns von unseren gemeinsamen Werten und gefährden am Ende auch unsere Institutionen. Aus diesem Grund, Frau Präsidentin, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, unterstütze ich den Ordnungsantrag unseres Kollegen aus Frankreich, diese Frage umfassender vorzubereiten und für die Winterkonferenz in Wien zu traktandieren. Ansonsten bitte ich Sie, die vorgeschlagene Änderung der Geschäftsordnung abzulehnen. Ich danke Ihnen für die Aufmerksamkeit.
Thank you. Next one will be Germany and Mrs. De Ridder.
Ich stimme all denjenigen zu, die den Charakter unserer Organisation deutlich machen und hier betonen, dass es sich um eine Dialogplattform handelt. Ich will ganz offen sein. Bei der Tagung in Wien hatten wir die Delegationen von Russland und Belarus dabei. Leider hat die ukrainische Delegation ja dann auf ihre Anwesenheit verzichtet, was ich sehr gut verstehen konnte angesichts der Aggression Russlands und auch des Co-Aggressors Belarus. Das muss man ganz offen bekennen. Ich will aber auch deutlich machen, dass ich es wichtig fand, dass wir als Parlamentarierinnen und Parlamentarier unsere Kommentare den russischen und belarussischen Delegierten zu Gehör bringen konnten. Denn dies ist wichtig, nämlich sie nicht von der Kritik auszusparen. Und das will ich auch all denjenigen sagen, die ganz gewiss recht haben, wenn sie sagen, dass insbesondere Russland unsere Form des Dialoges zu unterlaufen versucht, ja sogar unsere Organisation in ihrer Existenz zu zerstören versucht. Gleichwohl möchte ich daran appellieren, dass dieser Änderungsantrag zur Geschäftsordnung problematisch ist. Wir sollten ihn noch viel, viel ausdrücklicher in seinen Konsequenzen diskutieren. Denn was bedeutet denn die Berücksichtigung von Einwänden? Das, denke ich, muss uns klar sein. Und Frau Präsidentin, Sie haben hier eine große Verantwortung. Und deshalb sollten wir dies heute, und deshalb ist das meine Bitte, so nicht beschließen, sondern wirklich schauen, welche Konsequenzen das hat. Und ich schließe mich all denjenigen an, die sagen, das muss in der Konsequenz berücksichtigt werden für die Wintertagung. Ich will noch mal deutlich machen, dass die Addition von Monologen noch lange kein Dialog ist. Auch das sollten wir uns bewusst machen. Und Geschäftsordnungen, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, müssen unseren Prinzipien dienen, nicht umgekehrt. Vielen Dank.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Coles, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Well, there's a lot to obviously digest. I think in the end, the discussion somewhat kind of diverted from the amendment. It's not about the dialogue, it's about the principles and how we conduct our parliamentary assemblies and how exactly parliamentarian work is being conducted. I mean, name one parliament in the world in which MPs can vote not being present at the session. Just one parliament in the world. There's none. So with this amendment, that is my conviction. I propose, because it will be illogical for me to propose amendment to forbid something. So only way we can decide as institution, as the heads of the delegation, is by voting, as we do in the parliaments. And also, the 19 signatories from 7 member states, they have their democratic rights to submit this, and they have the rights for you also for you to be asked to vote on that, to cast your attitude, either in support or against. So therefore, saying that this is undemocratic, it's in its basis wrong. This is exactly how we conduct business in parliaments. Yes, you might like it, you might not like it, you might say, well, this is being tricked around. No, but this is the only way how we can say that further in our sessions that we either accept those who are not present they're writing a vote or not. So I really, if there is still discussion to ongo and have a large, for eternity discussions, I will suggest then to divide the votes today. First to vote in order to submit to the Rules of Procedure Committee. If it's not submitted to the Rules of Procedure Committee, I ask to vote for the proposed amendments here and now the Standing Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coles. And now give the floor to Mr. Montella, please.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you very much for this very illuminating debate. I think, Mr. Coles, at the end, you basically explained very well what is the essence here. The essence is, when we decide by consensus, should this consensus, which is not a vote, it's the chair verifies if there is consensus. Should the chair verify if there is consensus in the assembly, hence accepting a letter from some participating state who for some reason cannot attend the session, or should she verify if there is consensus in the room when the meeting takes place? Now, why the founding fathers made it, no, but you should verify consensus in the assembly, is because these were the natural, the constitution. So it's all the constituents, fathers, should have a say. You cannot just change the nature of the organization without, for some reason, a participating state being in the room. But let's go, and I would like to be very, very honest and practical, because we are talking about the rules, but we know what we're talking about. Here, what we are trying to do is that, because when I saw the amendment, I must say, and now understanding a little bit more, some ancestors of mine from Florence will be very impressed with our capacities. But I think what we are trying to do is introducing an amendment which is very good. I think what it says there is exactly what has happened in practice, and bring it to a vote and hence make it fail and then say the opposite applies. Now, let's say that it becomes the practice, okay? This becomes the practice. Consensus is only verified in the room. The idea of this, because it was triggered already in Warsaw after this amendment to kind of suspend the country as violated the Helsinki Final Act. The idea was, if this passes now, is that at some other session of the Assembly, we will be able to bring this amendment to the table, and obviously whoever will send a letter will not be able to block us, because we will discuss in the room and we will verify if there is consensus in the room. But it's not my business to do politics here, but if I hear the debate here, and I've heard at least 7, 8 delegations, and there were 16 in Warsaw, who, on this issue, also if we forget about all the letters that will come from participating states who for some reason are not invited to the meeting, but also those present in the room have concerns on the changing the constitution, let's say, of this assembly. And so we will still verify in the room that there will be 2, 3 delegations, unless there is a huge, activity of lobbying or maybe pushing people out of the room while the vote. This was even suggested at some point, let's send people out of the room and then let's just quickly say who is in favor, who is against, and then they say it's adopted. So I don't know where this will lead us, but again, what I'm saying is that if we establish the practice that you can propose something and that something doesn't pass and its opposite becomes the new rule, if you look at other things of the Assembly, this could be very dangerous precedent, and again here we are trying to find legal ways to, at the core problem is always, how can we punish Russia? I am of the opinion that you have been punishing Russia with all the tools that this Assembly has, and here we're trying to create new tools to also punish Russia in a legal way through the Standing Committee, but we risk that we introduce in our rules some loopholes that can be dangerous for the future. But again, it's not my business to give advice on what should be delegations' positions on this amendment. I'm just flagging up the danger of this, but also suggesting if the political objective is that in one of the next meetings we will be able to pass an amendment, I think if we've heard what comes out of this debate, we might create expectations that then will be again disappointed, and then how do we come out of that? So I'm just thinking of the interest of the Assembly. Shouldn't we be remaining on the track record being the most successful parliamentary body and also within the OSCE the most successful institution, which has delivered all the possible sanctions thanks to our American friends and their resolution in 2014, and keep on beating up on these and of course providing all possible sanctions on the way where we can deliver, instead of trying to punch higher and then fail to punch higher. That's all my idea, and a very honest opinion here, but I hope that I can help guide you through this. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberto. I can see that there are a few people, few delegates who would like to take the floor, but due to the time limit, we only have 45 minutes left. I only give one person the floor. That is Mr. Alizad, who is the chair of the subcommittee of Rules of Procedure.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Je vais être vraiment très bref parce que je vous ai demandé la parole avant l'intervention de Roberto Montella et il vient de dire exactement ce que je voulais rappeler. Donc voilà, j'en ai terminé. Merci à vous.
All right. I give the floor to Chris. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Are we happy with all this thing? Are we happy, really? We have amendments that are not serious. Somebody suggesting something that will not vote. Come on, we have to be serious here. We hear parallel monologues, no discussion at all, no consensus at all. Are we happy? So, do you remember New Deal in the United States at 30s? We need here a new approach, a new plan for our organization. And we have to be serious. We need a plan for the future. And we have to be serious because we have to handle huge problems that are very serious for our societies. Armenia is hosting this event. Thank you very much. But we have to speak also for Armenian problems. Ukraine has a war with Russia. And we have to discuss, not just to make this thing one against the others. So we have to be serious and we have to discuss a new plan for our organization. Without a plan, without a clear view, we will not go on. We have a problem and we have to discuss, not to scream. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and since I gave the floor to Greece, I will have to give it to Italy, please.
Grazie Presidente Kauma. Io credo che a fronte di quanto è stato espresso anche dal segretario generale Dottor Montella, visto anche l'orario, credo che sia opportuno e di buon senso un approfondimento nella Commissione Regolamento dedicata di questo emendamento, e non è assolutamente una perdita di tempo, ma è un approfondimento, e secondo noi, secondo la delegazione italiana, è assolutamente utile e doveroso. Grazie.
Grazie. And did I hear it right, Mr. Coles, that you have point of order? What is it about?
Thank you, Madam President. It's actually the Rules of Procedure, Rule 46, amendments of the Rules of Procedure. There are 3 points that actually stipulates how can it be done. The Rule 46.1 is your prerogative as a Madam President to initiate any discussions for the subcommittee to examine the rules of procedure and make recommendations to the standing committee. It's not based on submitted amendments. It is your initiative. So whatever rule. The point 2 for the 46th rule, When a member of the Assembly submits amendments to the Rules of Procedure, these amendments shall be submitted in writing and signed by at least 11 members from at least 3 countries, 19 signatories, 7 member states. Point 3, when the Standing Committee has amended the Rules of Procedure, by this I mean if we look at the procedure, there should be no bypassing if the members of the delegations have cleared the Rule 46.2, it has to be voted. There is no prerogative to divert or delay decision-making on submitted amendments, proposals. So therefore, I still insist, according to the Rule 46, that these amendments are either that by voting submitted to the Rules of Procedure Committee, or if it's not, then voted here in the Standing Committee today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coles. According to the rule number 46, there is no mentioning about voting as we interpret it. If I may, I will say my opinion now of the proceedings. So I think it is important to note that the proposed amendment is not a major change to our actual processes. However, taking into consideration the questions raised already today, and noting that there are pros and cons to this amendment, and noting also that there is absence of several delegations to this meeting, I will ask the Rules Committee to study this proposed amendment and refer back to the Standing Committee at its next meeting in Vienna. And the reason is that this will give us time to study this proposal in greater detail. All delegations will then have a better opportunity to express their approval or disapproval. I think this is in line with the spirit of our rules, and especially in times like this, I think that it is utmost important that we give careful consideration how and if we change the rules of procedure. Thank you. And I can see 2 delegations wanting the floor still, so Mrs. Karalambides from Cyprus and thereafter Sweden. All right, Sweden, if you're ready, please go ahead, and thereafter Mrs. Karalambides.
Thank you, Madam President. I can't see any reasons why this is so complicated proposal from Lithuania, sorry. So it has to be considered by the committee or the Rules of Procedure Committee. I think we should go to a decision right now and to vote for it. I mean, to be honest, I think people here have been focused on wrong things. First, when we talk about excluding delegations, it's not a matter of that at all. They have mentioned dialogue. Yes, I agree totally that dialogue is very important to have. But this proposed amendment here, and if it's voted down, stops delegation from sitting back home in their own countries by letter blocking things we have dialogue here in, and to achieve our goal here with our dialogues. I think it's very important to be present in the room if you have a dialogue, not sitting back in your own home countries, sending letters to the Parliamentary Assembly and blocking everything we do here. And I can't see that the proposed amendment here is so complicated that it can't be up for a vote right here today. Thank you.
I give the floor to Irene Karalambides, and thereafter the discussion is closed.
Thank you, Madam President. Actually, it's completely another subject. I just wanted to briefly take the floor to let you know that as a member of the Rules Subcommittee, I will continue my efforts to introduce further amendments, and that will make Dr. Fry extremely happy, to improve the gender balance of our Assembly. Women participation in international peace and security has been recently discussed at an open dialogue at the United Nations Security Council, it has been underlined that gender equal participation in peace processes is producing more resilient agreements, contributing in peace building around the world, and our assembly as a platform whose primary role is to promote dialogue and peace must reinforce gender equal participation. With Dr. Fry's support and leadership in this area, I am sure that this agenda can be further strengthened for the benefit of our Assembly. I will also continue work on drafting a legally binding code of conduct, and I will be reaching out to delegations to receive everybody's feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Charalambires. I would like to comment to Mr. Buser from Sweden that I already commented to the point of order, and I entirely understand your point of view, but there is a risk that the new amendment to the rules of procedure will be interpreted exactly the opposite way. So at least I would be interpreting it in a different way. There are risks involved to that, and therefore I think it is really a good thing to pass it on to the Committee of Rules of Procedure in order to be really carefully analyzed. So you have my sympathy, but this is my decision. Thank you. Then we move on to item number 6, review of recent OSCE activities and information on upcoming meetings and activities of the OSCE. And first we talk at point 6.1 of election observation missions. We have had one election observation mission since our last annual session, and I personally had the honor to serve as the special coordinator for the parliamentary elections in Poland, on which I will briefly report. First and foremost, I would like to thank my colleague Per-John Pons for a great cooperation in leading the election observation mission of the parliamentary elections in Poland, as well as all of the observers who took part in this mission. Our OSCE delegation consisted of 94 observers, including 74 members of parliament from 31 different countries. On this, let me note that one OSCE member from Belarus was denied accreditation by the Polish authorities. OSCE observers deployed throughout the country to assess election day proceedings, including Warsaw, Krakow, Gdansk, Wrocław, and Lublin. The mission was a joint effort with our partners from OSCE ODIHR and the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. We concluded that the elections were competitive and voters had a wide choice of political alternatives, but the ruling party enjoyed clear advantage through its undue influence over the use of state resources and the public media. It also had many other shortcomings. Election day as such was calm. Voters enthusiastically turned out in large numbers, and the process was well managed in the polling stations visited by our observers. Our full report, which extends to some 18 pages, is available to you, and I expect that ODIHR's final report will be published soon and will include a number of concrete recommendations. As colleagues and friends, the OSCE stands ready to assist the authorities of Poland at any time in this process. Thank you. Are there any questions or comments on this observation mission? If not, please be reminded that the OSCE will deploy a mission to observe the parliamentary elections in Serbia on the 17th of December. Vice President Reinhold Lopatka will serve as special coordinator, and Vice President Daniela de Ridder will lead our OSCE delegation. I understand that our colleague Farah Karimi participated in an election-related conference recently upon invitation from our partners in ODIHR. Farah, would you like to report on your experience there? Please.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And before talking about my experiences in Addis Ababa, I would like, on behalf of the members of delegation from the Netherlands who participated in the election observation mission in Poland, to thank you for your leadership, because it was not an easy mission, and you have done with other colleagues a great job. So therefore, a big thank you to you. And thank you also for the opportunity to talk about my experience in Addis Ababa. I was indeed invited by ODIHR to participate in the annual meeting of signatories of the Declaration on Principles for International Election Observations. Organizations like African Union, Organization of American States, ODIHR, Council of Europe, and some other international organizations. This meeting was organized by the African Union. My role was to talk about the difficulties we face in communicating about observing elections globally, drawing from my own experiences. This was particularly relevant after the general elections in Turkey this year. Farid Zakaria, CNN's political commentator, wrote on the basis of our report and findings on Turkey, and I quote, "When elections are held in these circumstances, and international observers duly note that the ballots were properly cast and counted, and then certify such elections to be genuine competition, they are doing the world a disservice. We need a new vocabulary to describe this phenomenon. Are such elections free? Technically, yes, but they are also profoundly unfair." And this is a very, very harsh criticism, and relevant also to our organization. In my speech, I stressed how crucial it is to observe elections to maintain democratic values and the challenges in reporting these observations accurately. Nowadays, with more authoritarianism on the rise, it is hard to report on elections in a balanced way, especially when these elections seem free, but actually have problems like unfair advantages, media bias, misuse of administrative resources, and restrictions on freedom of political groups and individual candidates. I underline the necessity of having robust democratic institutions and leaders who truly present democratic ideas. And I pointed out the worrying increase in authoritarian and even anti-democratic politicians in more and more countries, even in established democracies. I made a case for the vital role of those observations and noted that at the end we hesitate as international election observation missions to formulate an overall judgment whether they are free and fair. I called for simpler, clearer ways to communicate elections in examining the full electoral process, not just checking if the vote count are correct, to ensure that elections are really democratic. I also highlighted the complexity and jargon-filled nature of reports on election observations, which makes it hard for the general public to understand, and about these matters addressing journalists and audience both locally and internationally. The essential principles are the freedom to vote and the fairness of elections. We really need a new way of communicating, new vocabulary to convey our findings on the basis of the values of free and fair elections. Additionally, I focused on the importance of proactive communication strategies, like using social media by election observation missions to reach out to the public, particularly young people. These ideas were well received by the audience in Addis Ababa. I also hope that we can enhance our own contribution to findings and communication of election observations, as election observations are crucial for our assembly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Karimi, and thank you also for your kind words related to Poland. We now move on to item number 6.2 related to ad hoc committees. You will recall that in Vancouver we established a committee to channel our work on Ukraine, which has since been named the Parliamentary Support Team on Ukraine. I have decided to chair this committee, assisted by Mr. Mikita Poturayev and Mr. Joe Wilson as co-chairs. Members have been appointed with the objective of maintaining geographical, political and gender balance. I've also made some additional appointments to our other committees. I also take this opportunity to thank Vice President Daniela de Ridder for accepting to chair the ad hoc committee on migration. I will first briefly report on the work of the Parliamentary Support Team for Ukraine before giving the floor to Vice President Reinhold Lopatka for the ad hoc committee on countering terrorism and Vice President Daniela de Ridder for the ad hoc committee on migration. So, dear friends, with my co-chairs, I have appointed 3 committee reporters for each OSCE security dimensions, respectively. First of all, Mr. Richard Skols from Latvia for the politico-military dimension. The second, Mr. Mark Demesmaker from Belgium for the economic and environmental dimension. And third, Mrs. Margareta Sederfeldt for the human dimension. Our committee rapporteurs will follow developments pertaining to each security dimension to ensure greater coordination with our general committees. The PSTU held its inaugural meeting virtually in October to discuss priorities and key objectives. The subcommittee will predominantly focus on support of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, the economic and environmental recovery of Ukraine, and the establishment of international justice mechanisms for the war crimes committed by the Russian Federation in Ukraine. During our inaugural meeting, the subcommittee was addressed by the head of the Kharkiv Regional State Administration. In the future, the committee will continue to provide a platform to Ukrainian representatives to inform us about ongoing developments and the situation on the ground. I met with Mr. Ruslan Stefanchuk, the chairman of the Verkhovna Rada, that is the Parliament of Ukraine, at the European Conference of Presidents of Parliament held in Dublin in September. Chairman Stefanchuk expressed his support for our annual declaration adopted earlier in Vancouver this year, particularly the establishment of this new committee on Ukraine. I also attended the second parliamentary summit of the International Crimea Platform, which was held in Prague last month. This was another opportunity to highlight the establishment of the committee. The subcommittee on Ukraine will meet right after the standing committee to discuss next steps and future activities. Thank you. Are there any questions or comments related to the work of the Parliamentary Support Team for Ukraine? If not, I now give the floor to Vice President Lopatka on ad hoc committee on countering terrorism.
Thank you very much, Madam President, dear colleagues. The challenges and threats that we face in countering terrorism and violent extremism are rapidly evolving. One persistent trend is that crises and conflicts in regions are a primary driver of terrorism. We see it in Gaza, we see it in the Sahel, only to give 2 examples. All of us were shocked by these terrorist attacks launched by Hamas against Israel on October 7th, killing and wounding thousands of civilians, kidnapping hundreds of innocent persons, including children. And I join our President in expressing full solidarity and sympathy to the people of Israel. We condemn all violence against unarmed civilians. And of course, we urge the immediate release of all hostages and stress the need to bring to justice all terrorists. This is a very crucial moment for our democracies. We need to be able to respond effectively to terrorism in all its forms and protect our citizens, institutions, and values. And we should do it in compliance with the rule of law to demonstrate that we are totally different from them and that we are right while they are wrong. This is, for me, very important. What we are doing, and I want to be very short, and you have the written version of my report, is to work with other parliamentary assemblies. As Karima mentioned before, when she was with colleagues discussing what we can learn from each other, observing elections, we do the same in our fight against terrorism and violent extremism. In this regard, I'm happy that I can report that the 4th Counterterrorism Coordination Meeting of Parliamentary Assemblies, organized by the United Nations, and with strong support from us, from our staff, we were asked to continue to chair this coordination mechanism. 16 parliamentary assemblies around the globe, also from the African Union, from Latin America, from all regions of the world, are working here together with the United Nations Office of Counterterrorism. And this gives us the chance promoting a more comprehensive and coherent counterterrorism response. What I want to say is that here OSCE really could show that we can take the lead in this work, and we will continue with this work. And beside this, of course, we have to do our homework, meaning working within our organization. I am in close contact with the Vice President of the committee coming from Turkey, that we will have our next field visit in Turkey. We had our last one in March in Switzerland, where we had the chance to meet other organizations strongly involved in this work countering terrorism. Concluding, I would like to say thank you to all the committee members for their strong support, and I also want to commend the highly professional support provided by our International Secretariat. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Lopatka, and I now give the floor to Vice President De Ridder.
Thank you, Madam President Pia Kauma. Migration is one of the most urgent issues of our time. And as I already mentioned, we have several hotspots to deal with. But on November 3rd, the committee held its first online meeting. And I already mentioned that 6 new members from Portugal, Belgium, Italy, Turkey, and Germany have been appointed. The UNHCR representative in Armenia, Mrs. Kavita Belani, provided detailed information on the humanitarian work for refugees from Nagorno-Karabakh region in Azerbaijan who are in urgent need of further support. On November 9th, we discussed Canada's diverse experiences as an example of best practice for regular migration. I would like to thank Dr. Hedy Fry once more for her organizational support. Important factors for successful integration were identified, such as preparatory offers from the immigration authorities, welcoming communities, especially for minorities, language and integration courses, or housing and a reliable naturalization perspective. The committee wants to promote parliamentary dialogue within and between the participating states, counter xenophobic rhetoric, and develop policy recommendation. The focus will be in the next future on the best practice experiences. On the one hand, this concerns labor migration with a focus on sustainable labor market integration. And on the other hand, we will place an emphasis on flight and displacement. The right to asylum and the human rights protection of refugees must be guaranteed. In particular, we focus on vulnerable groups such as unaccompanied minors, women, elderly people, people with disabilities, and LGBTIQIA+. A fair distribution mechanism for people seeking protection based on the model of the common European asylum system is necessary in order not to overburden individual host countries. The causes of flight, and I insist on this, such as war, climate change, and hunger, must be tackled sustainably. Other key topics include repatriation agreements with safe third countries and concepts for gender-sensitive migration policy. Field visits are essential for our further work. A delegation visit to Lampedusa and Sicily in Italy is being prepared for early 24. Another field visit is to take place in Turkey. We want to find out to what extent the EU refugee agreement can serve as a model for further readmission agreements. The West African Economic Alliance's ECOWAS and the OSCE partner countries of the Maghreb and the Middle East are further important cooperation partners. In addition, the Migration Committee will work closely with ODIHR. ODIHR will provide its expertise, especially in the areas of human rights protection and country report. And the next meeting, or the first meeting in presence, will take place tomorrow. And I'm happy, dear President Kauma, that you will be our guest with, together with Carrie Hendrickson, and you will attend our meeting to inform the members about the experiences of your joint visit, as you already mentioned, to South Caucasus. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Mrs. de Ridder. And before I close this point, let me thank all the members involved in these committees for their engagement. We now move on to item number 6.3 about upcoming assembly events and statutory meetings.
Madam President, if I may, a point of order, if I may. Thank you very much.
Yes,
this organisation has the words security.
Excuse me, Mr. Pritchard, what is it about, the point of order?
Well, I'm about to tell you, if you'll let me.
All right.
Thank you. Right.
Yes.
And if I'll wait for Loic to finish.
Is it the ruling that you would like to make the point of order, or a speech?
Yeah, but I'll let you two guys finish your conversation then first, if you'd like to. Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Right, thank you. This organisation has the word security and cooperation in it. We have spent most of the morning talking about the budget, that's legitimate, rules and procedures, that is legitimate, but I've just been informed that item 7 on the agenda, review of current international issues, has now been abandoned in order that we can talk endlessly about reports that have been produced orally today that could have been submitted in a written fashion. We have heard from the same people, the same characters, the same countries, on the same issues. The whole of the morning, we have not discussed Ukraine in detail. We have not discussed the Middle East. We have not discussed the Western Balkans. We have not discussed security. We have not discussed cooperation. And I'm afraid, quite frankly, it is not good enough, Madam President. It has been endless talking from the same people on the same issues, all of it a procedural administration. This organisation, let's talk on the substantive stuff. Let's talk about the Middle East. Let's talk about Ukraine. Let's talk about Armenia and Azerbaijan. Quite frankly, it's not good enough. Item 7, current international issues, now abandoned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pritchard. I feel you. I feel that, I think that we are all a little bit frustrated about the situation of the turmoil that is going on in the world. But unfortunately, our interpretation will end in 10 minutes, so that is why I need to go further according to our original agenda. So we now move further to 6.3, upcoming assembly events and statutory meetings. So I would like to inform the Standing Committee that our Bureau will meet on the 29th of November prior to the Ministerial Council meeting in Skopje. As customary, our winter meeting will be held in Vienna on 22nd and 23rd of February next year. The Bureau will meet again in Copenhagen on the 29th of April. Our 31st annual session will take place in Bucharest between the 29th of June and 3rd of July. Our 2024 autumn meeting will take place in Dublin during the week of 29th of September to 4th of October. As announced previously, the 2025 annual session will be hosted by Portugal. I would like to warmly thank all these delegations for offering to host us. This is one of the concrete ways each of our national parliaments can support our work. We greatly appreciate your generosity and commitment. And now we move forward to item number 7, review of current international issues. And I will now open the floor for open discussion on current events, and we have 7 minutes to go.
That's the one we said we would not do.
So
that's the one we said we would not do. So they've already been warned that it's not going to happen.
all right. I'm being informed that there had been 3 speakers which all have been informed that this discussion will not take place now, but later on in the afternoon. So we now move on to item number 8, which is any other business. So does anyone wish to raise any other issues? If not, before I close this meeting, let me remind you that there are no shuttles back to hotels during this lunch break. There is a restaurant available in the conference center. Let me also remind you, excuse me? Let me also remind you to sign up in advance to speak in our sessions. You may sign up near the International Secretariat's office outside this room. The lists will close on 1 hour before each session. We will resume this afternoon with our inaugural session at 3 o'clock. This meeting is concluded. Thank you.